I wish someone had warned me that betrayal doesn't always arrive with fists or fury. Sometimes it comes wrapped in birthday ribbon. We were at Brian's house, his third one, the big one he bragged about with the stone fireplace and open-concept kitchen. He'd invited me for dinner to celebrate my day, though it felt more like an obligation than affection. His wife barely looked up from her phone. My grandson had his earbuds in. I sat at the head of the table, though no one seemed to notice. The leak came up casually, something about a pipe under the guest bathroom. Brian groaned, said the estimate was steep. I offered to cover it. "It's nothing," I said. "A couple $100." He didn't even look at me. "We're not taking handouts from a charity case, Dad." The fork clattered first mine. Then came the silence. His wife pressed her lips together like she was suppressing a laugh. My grandson kept chewing. I blinked, thought I misheard, but no one corrected him. "Charity case," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. Brian finally looked up. "I mean, you're on a fixed income, right? You've done enough, just enjoy retirement." I couldn't find words. Not right then. Not with his words still echoing like a slap to the ribs. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. The shadows circled like vultures. Grace would have known what to say. She always did. But she wasn't here anymore. And I was starting to wonder if Brian even remembered the man who paid for his college, who bailout him out after the failed startup, who helped with the down payment on this very house. Charity case. I got up slowly, my joints stiff from hours of stillness. I reached under the bed and pulled out the old metal lockbox. Inside was the folder, the original trust. Grace and I drafted it together, every line, every clause. Brian was named, yes, but not unconditionally. I ran my fingers over her signature, the loops, the ink that bled ever so slightly in the corners. She, written it in front of the fireplace, our knees touching, her voice steady. "If Brian ever forgets who raised him, remind him." That night, I whispered the words she once whispered to me after her diagnosis. Not anymore. Not the man they could walk over. Not the father they could treat like a bank account with a pulse. And definitely not the charity case he so easily imagined I'd become. I returned the folder to the box, locked it, slid it back under the bed, but something had shifted, something final. He wanted a life without obligations. I'd give it to him. With interest. The storage locker smelled like dust and old cedar, like the past hadn't been aired out in years. I shuffled past broken lamps and forgotten photo frames, brushing aside a rolled-up rug that once lay under our first dining table. The metal filing cabinet in the back was rusted, but the key still turned like it remembered me. Inside, wrapped in plastic and time, was the original trust deed. Elaine's handwriting stared up at me, still delicate, still certain. Our names, our signatures, the terms. Brian's name was there too, but with conditions. We agreed to give him access to his share only if he maintained regular communication and didn't use the assets to fund business ventures of risk. That was Elaine's phrasing. She'd always seen around corners I never noticed. Under the folder was something else. An envelope, brittle at the corners. Elaine's handwriting again, only this time addressed to me. I opened it with shaking hands. The letter was dated 10 years ago. "Tom, if you're reading this, then something has already started to go wrong. I don't know what form it'll take, but I know how people change when they start counting other people's money. If love ever turns cruel, don't leave what we built in their hands. They'll smile while dismantling it. Trust yourself. And remember, the legacy isn't just in what we give, it's in what we protect." It hit harder than anything Brian had said. Her words were like wind chimes in a locked room, familiar, gentle, but haunting. I sat on a broken stool, letter in hand, hearing her voice as if she were right behind me. I wiped my eyes and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Helen Bearden's office. "It's Tom Holloway. I need to speak with her." There was a pause, then her voice, still sharp as glass and warm as a wool coat. "Tom, good heavens, it's been a lifetime." "It has," I said. "I need to revisit Elaine's trust and revise some things." She paused again, this time longer. "What happened?" "My son. He said I was a charity case, laughed about it in front of his family." "I see. And I found a letter from Elaine. She warned me this might happen." Helen let out a slow breath. She always did have good instincts. "Will you help me?" I asked. "Do this right." "I remember Elaine," she said. "Of course I will. Clear your afternoon. I'll make time." I stepped out into the light with the letter in one hand, the deed in the other. The sun hit the top of the filing cabinet just so, catching a glint off the brass handle. Old signatures in fatting ink. But what I was about to do would be written fresh. Helen's office hadn't changed. Same oak bookshelves, same painting of the autumn lake above the fireplace, even the same chipped mug on her desk, the one Elaine gave her the year we revised our will. She slid the trust documents toward me, tapping the corner with a red pen. "You still have full authority to amend distribution," she said. "Elaine gave you primary discretion after her passing. Brian's portion is conditional, based on care, communication, character." "None of which he's shown," I said quietly. Helen nodded. "So what do you want to do?" I stared at my hands. They once carried Brian on my shoulders, fixed his car, built the treehouse he begged for. Now they trembled with the weight of deciding what kind of man he'd grown into and whether I could keep pretending he'd come back from it. "He called me a charity case," I said finally, "in front of his wife, his son, like I was a burden they tolerated." Helen didn't blink. "Then let's make it literal." I looked up. "Elaine once told me," she continued, "that her real legacy wasn't in real estate or accounts. It was in what she gave away freely." A memory surfaced, Elaine on a folding chair, reading to children at the downtown shelter. She volunteered there every Tuesday, rain or shine. Said books were safer homes than most kids had. "She loved that place," I murmured. "She funded their first computer lab," Helen added. "I still have the receipt." We talked through the possibilities. A scholarship fund in her name, a library wing, the Elaine Holloway Children's Room, educational grants for girls aging out of foster care, programs with her name on the plaque, not just mine. Not charity, justice, not pity, purpose. Helen began drafting, her pen scratched with urgency and grace. "This will replace Brian's share," she said. "Everything moves into the charitable trust on your passing, but until then, you retain control." I took the pen. I thought of Brian's smirk, his dismissal, the way he leaned back in his chair after calling me a handout. I signed. The ink didn't just dry, it healed something. Helen placed the papers into a sealed folder and slid it across the desk. "Hold on to it," she said. "Don't file it just yet." "Why not?" "Let him dig his own hole first. Paper trails make better witnesses than fathers do." I nodded. He already started. Outside her office, the wind had picked up. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked slowly down the steps, past the blooming magnolia trees Elaine used to love. She asked me once, near the end, if I thought Brian would take care of things when she was gone. I'd said yes. And now I was doing what I should have done then. Taking care of it myself. I was sipping my afternoon tea when the doorbell rang, sharp, impatient. Through the glass I saw Mark standing there, arms crossed, smile too wide for a casual visit. "Dad," he said as I opened the door, "got a minute?" He stepped inside before I could answer, like the house still belonged to him in some unspoken future. He didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the birthday, went straight to business. "I need a favor," he said, dropping into the armchair across from me. "Just a small thing. I'm applying for a home loan. Nothing crazy, just a second property. I raised an eyebrow. Another one. He shrugged. You know how the market is. You either move or get left behind. I sipped my tea. What do you need from me? He leaned forward, elbows on knees. A cosigner. Your name's solid, just need you on the paperwork. It's just a formality, really. You don't actually own anything useful anymore, but the history helps. I froze mid-sip. My fingers tightened around the cup. He didn't even flinch at his own words. Just kept going, explaining interest rates, monthly breakdowns, the banker's name. I reached for the small digital recorder in the drawer beside me, the one I used to tape Grace reading poetry in her last months. Slid it into my pocket and pressed the side button while he rambled. Just a signature, Mark said. You'll barely notice, but it'll make a real difference for us. I forced a smile. Of course, son, let me sleep on it. He stood, clapping his hands together. I knew you'd get it. Knew you weren't gonna be petty about the other night. I followed him to the door. He turned just before leaving. Oh, and don't mention this to Helen. Lawyers make everything complicated. Of course not, I said. When the door closed behind him, the air in the house felt thinner. I sat back down and played the audio. Heard his voice call me useless. A formality. Heard myself pretend it didn't hurt. Then I sent the file to Helen. It took her 5 minutes to respond. Subject, recording received. Message, perfect. We now have a pattern: financial manipulation, verbal degradation, entitlement. Let's set the press release clock. I stared at the screen, felt something shift again, not rage, not sadness, clarity. He hadn't come for help. He'd come to use what little of me he thought was left. And I'd given him just enough rope. The restaurant was quiet, one of those old brick places with tablecloths and waiters who didn't interrupt. Helen sat across from me, sipping club soda with lemon. Next to her, a young woman with a recorder and a notepad. Mr. Holloway, she said gently, you don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable. I'm not here for comfort, I replied. I'm here for truth. She clicked the recorder on and waited. I started at the beginning, the birthday dinner. The word charity tossed like a joke over salad and wine. The look in Mark's eyes when he said it, not rage, not disgust. Just boredom, like he'd already forgotten I was a person. I told her about the trust, the amendment, the recording. Raphael, the waiter. Elaine's letter. The volunteer center she gave her Tuesday mornings to for 14 years. I didn't hold back. I'm not angry, I said. I'm awake, that's different. The reporter looked up. Why go public now? I hesitated. He didn't steal from me, I said finally. He stole from the memory of who we were. He made our love into a ledger. Helen rested her hand over mine. That's the quote, she whispered. The journalist smiled, shut her notebook, and promised to let me review the article before it ran. I told her not to bother. Let the truth go where it wants to go. 2 mornings later, the headline hit the front page of the Sunday section. He called his father a charity case. Now his inheritance is feeding 200 kids. I read it at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me. My photo was there, taken from behind, standing in front of the new library wing with Elaine's name etched in glass. The article painted the full picture: elder abuse in estate planning, legal safeguards, the hidden cruelty behind soft voices and cold smiles. And my story, told not as tragedy, but as a warning. That afternoon, donations started rolling into the foundation. Small ones, large ones, handwritten letters from people saying, my father went through the same. This restored my faith. Elaine must have been one hell of a woman. She was. Mark hadn't seen the article yet. But the world had. A local radio station requested an interview. Helen handled the logistics. I declined. I didn't need a microphone. The story was already speaking for itself. and for the first time in a long while, the silence around me didn't feel like absence. It felt like dignity. The call came just after dinner. "Hey, Dad, can we talk? Just us. No lawyers." His voice was steady, rehearsed, the kind of calm that comes after someone been told to sound calm. I waited a beat, then said, "Sure." We met the next morning at a cafe halfway between our houses, neutral ground, public enough that no one would raise their voice. Mark arrived in a crisp blazer, no tie, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. He ordered black coffee. I didn't order anything. He opened with charm, memories of baseball games, how Mom used to burn pancakes. It was all carefully stacked nostalgia. I let him pile it high. Then he leaned in. "Look, I've been thinking about legacy, about family. I know I said some dumb things. We all have bad days." I said nothing. He continued, "This doesn't need to be complicated. I talked to my guy and we have a version of the will that makes sense. Clean, fair." He pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "You keep the house. No contest. I just want the financial assets. It's easier for everyone." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. I reached into my coat and pulled out one of my own, laid it gently between us. "This is the only version now," I said. He furrowed his brow, opened it and froze. His eyes scanned the page, then again. You gave it away?" he asked, voice suddenly thinner. "No," I said softly. "I gave it back, to someone who never asked for it." He stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. "That's not fair," he muttered. "Neither is raising a son who thinks fathers are stepping stones." His jaw twitched. "You're just doing this to punish me." "No, I'm doing it to protect what your mother and I built. You stopped seeing it as a legacy. You started seeing it as loot." He leaned back, eyes still on the paper. "So that's it." I nodded, "That's it." He looked around, suddenly aware of how quiet the cafe had become. A woman 2 tables over glanced away quickly. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the document back into its envelope, the movements less sure now. "I hope you know," he said slowly, "this won't go the way you think it will." I stood. "It already has." I walked out into the morning light, letting the door shut quietly behind me. My hands were empty. My heart was not. There was no gloating, no triumph. Just peace. And a trust finally resting in the hands of someone worthy of it. The building smelled like fresh paint and paperbacks. New shelves stretched along the walls, still a little bare, but already filled with life. Students with wide eyes and bent spines, flipping pages like they were holding treasure. The literacy center had done it right. The carpet was soft, the lighting warm, and at the far end of the room under a skylight stood the bronze plaque. The ELAINE, MARCHALL Library Wing. She gave children the one thing no one could take, a voice. Beside it hung her portrait, not posed, not the one we had in the house. This one was drawn from a photo I'd taken when she didn't know the camera was on. Her head tilted, mid-laugh, book open in her lap. I sat near the back. I didn't want to speak, just watch. A group of children from the after-school program gathered to read one of Elaine's favorite books, The Velveteen Rabbit. A little girl with beaded braids read the first line slowly, proudly, stumbling once but smiling through it. I felt something crack gently open in my chest. Helen sat beside me. "She'd be proud of this," she whispered. "She built it," I replied. "I just followed the blueprint." The director of the center stood and gave a short speech, spoke about Elaine's years of service, her Tuesday readings, the computer she helped fund. Then he gestured to me. "Would Mr. Holloway like to say a few words?" I stood slowly, walked to the front, cleared my throat but didn't touch the mic. "My wife believed education was the greatest inheritance," I said. "I just followed her lead." That was all. That was enough. Applause rose like a tide, but I didn't really hear it. I looked at her portrait, the lines around her eyes, the warmth that still lived there. A local reporter from Channel 6 approached as people filed out. "Mr. Holloway, may we quote you on that line about inheritance?" I nodded. It was never mine to keep. That night, the segment aired during the evening news. "A legacy of literacy," the anchor called it. "One man's tribute to his late wife is now shaping the lives of hundreds." They played a clip of the children reading, panned to the plaque. My voice came through softly at the end. "My wife believed education was the greatest inheritance. I just followed her lead." I turned off the TV. The phone rang once. "Mark." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. No voicemail, no message. Just the echo of everything he hadn't said when it still mattered. I left the phone face down and returned to the kitchen. The tea was still warm. And the silence, for once, felt like a conversation I didn't mind having. He knocked just after sunset. No warning, no text, just that slow, uneven knock I used to hear when he was a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I opened the door and there he was, hair uncombed, cheeks blotchy, the same brown jacket he wore 5 years ago. It didn't fit the way it used to. Neither did he. "I'm not here to fight," he said, voice low. I stepped aside. He walked in like a man dragging invisible chains behind him, each step slower than the last. We stood in the living room, no small talk, no tea. "You embarrassed me," he said finally. "You let the whole city think I'm some kind of monster." I didn't respond. He rubbed his face. "You ruined my life over one stupid comment." I met his eyes. "No, Mark, you ruined your own life. I just stopped funding the illusion." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Looked around the room like he was searching for a version of me he used to know, the man who bailated him out, covered his debts, nodded quietly through disrespect. "I was angry," he muttered, "but I never thought you'd actually go through with it." "You thought wrong." He sat down, hunched over, elbows on his knees. For a second he looked like a child again, the one who cried when his dog died, who clung to me in thunderstorms. "I'm sorry," he said. The words didn't land, not because they were empty, but because they came from a place of loss, not understanding. "I didn't ask you here to apologize," I said, "and I don't need it." He nodded slowly. I don't know what to do now." "I don't either," I said honestly. There was a long silence, then he looked up. "Do you have anything to eat?" I walked to the kitchen, opened the freezer, stared into it. Nothing but ice trays. I turned back to him. "The freezer's empty," I said, "like your empathy." He blinked, like he hadn't expected the punchline to hurt. "I see," he said, standing. I didn't follow him to the door. He opened it himself, paused for a moment and looked back. "I really did think you'd forgive me." I kept my voice steady. "I did, I just stopped forgetting." He stepped out. I watched him go, his shoulders folded in on themselves, like the weight of a truth he'd ignored had finally found a place to sit. I closed the door with a soft click. No drama. No final word. Just the sound of peace resealing itself behind me. Helen handed me the folder like it weighed nothing, but I knew better. "All finalized," she said. "The new trust is sealed, filed, and legally irrevocable. No one can challenge it now, not him, not the courts, not even you." I nodded, fingers resting on the edge of the folder without taking it just yet. She leaned back in her chair, studying me the way only someone who's walked beside you through fire can. "You okay?" I let the question hang in the room a moment. "Estate settled," I said. "Name cleared, that's enough." I took the folder, placed it in my bag, and shook her hand. "Thank you, Helen." She smiled. "Elaine would have done the same for you." On the way home, I stopped by the post office. The man behind the counter recognized me, small town perks. I slid the large envelope across, addressed to the Children's Literacy Foundation. Inside was a copy of the final trust paperwork, a check for the first installment, and a handwritten note that simply read, "Elaine would have been proud. And so am I. A.Th." I paid the postage and walked out before he could ask questions. Back at the house, my house, still and finally mine, I began clearing out the last drawer in the hall bureau. Just a few odds and ends, old receipts, expired insurance cards, a broken pen. And then, tucked beneath a yellowing envelope, I found it. A photograph. Mark, maybe 6 or 7, perched on my shoulders in the backyard. I was mid-laugh. He had both hands in my hair, grinning like he'd conquered Everest. Elaine must have taken it. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the photo loosely between my fingers. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stared, longer than I meant to, longer than I should have. I remembered that afternoon, the way he laughed when I pretended to stumble, the smell of Elaine's lemonade, the sound of the sprinkler clicking in the background. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't regret. It was distance. That boy on my shoulders, he belonged to a version of Mark that I hadn't seen in decades, a version that had long since traded joy for calculation. I slid the photo into a manila envelope and packed it away with the other files from this chapter of my life. It wasn't trash, but it wasn't present either. It belonged to another life, and I was done trying to keep that life breathing. The sun was already high when I pulled into the lot. Children's laughter echoed from the courtyard, spilling out like sunlight itself. Bright colors everywhere, sidewalk chalk drawings, handmade paper bookmarks fluttering on strings. Someone had painted a mural since I was last here, books turning into birds. Inside the Foundation's reading center, they were halfway through a summer program story time. Kids sat in bean bags, books in their laps, mouths moving as they sounded out the words. They didn't know me. Not really. But they waved anyway. One little girl with purple berets ran up, arms open. "You're the library man." She hugged my waist without hesitation. I rested my hand lightly on her back, trying not to shake. I didn't need to say anything. Her grin filled every silence. That was enough. I walked the aisles slowly after that, watching them read. The walls were lined with brand new bookshelves, the kind that don't wobble, the kind that stay put. Labeled sections, soft rugs, a warmth that wasn't from insulation but from intention. My intention. Or more accurately, Elaine's. I made my way to the courtyard, to the stone bench beneath the maple tree. Her name was etched into the backrest now. In honor of Elaine Marshall, who believed every child deserves to be heard. I ran my fingers over the carving, the groove smooth but certain, just like her. I sat there for a while, no schedule, no one needing a signature, no phone buzzing in my pocket asking for one more thing. My tank felt lighter than it had in years. Not because I'd forgotten what happened, but because I'd finally remembered who I was before they forgot. The man who saved every holiday card, who drove 3 hours to fix a leaky pipe that didn't even leak, who read bedtime stories in silly voices just to make his son laugh. I was never a handout. I was a father, a husband, a man who gave and finally gave to someone who didn't ask, didn't expect, and didn't feel entitled. Just grateful. A young teacher walked by and nodded at me. "We're ordering another set of books next month," she said. "The kids are flying through them." I smiled. "Good." She paused. "Do you want your name on the plaque for the new reading room?" I shook my head gently. "It already has the right name." She nodded, understanding without needing more. When I stood to leave, a breeze rustled through the trees, a soft kind of hush, not silence, just peace stretching its arms. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked to my car, turned the engine, and let the quiet ride beside me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a charity case. I felt like the man who built something worth leaving behind.